I'm Charles Weir, and I'm here to talk about how not to do security. So I've been researching security now for 5 years or so at Lancaster University, and I kind of started at it from the wrong, sort of at odds with most of my colleagues, because as a matter of fact, I hate security. I find it a right nuisance, it's a real pain, it drives me nuts, all this business of remembering, making up silly passwords, remembering them, things like that. There's very little about it that's to love. But clearly it's really, really bad when bad things happen to people. So security is like going to the dentist. I'm a bit quiet at the moment, it's because I did recently and I had a tooth out. It can hurt a lot, but the main thing that we want to do is to keep it from hurting too much. So in this talk, I'm going to explore how we can kind of keep the security to the minimum we really need and what that takes. And to do that, I'm going to go through a journey, the journey that I took to lead you through to get to that. So I didn't start off in my research thinking, well, right, we need to decide what to leave out. Started off the other way around with the obvious question, as a developer, what should I do for security? So my purpose in this discussion is to fix the all security is good bug. Have you ever had a discussion with a security person and they say, oh yeah, we must do this because I say so?
Of course.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Best practice.
Yeah, exactly. Because I say so. Because we always do. Because whatever. Not because it's the right thing to do. Explore a little bit about what's happening in reality. I've had a few surprising shocks over the last 6 months when I started trying to find out what's really going on, and share some techniques that you might care to use yourself in development teams to identify what security you might be doing. Sounds good? Yes. Begin. So, 5 steps. I'll go through them. I started with the simple question, how does anybody do security? Security was kind of scary, really. 5 years ago, nobody much knew anything about it. I thought I'd reach for the, Bluffer's Guide to Security, and there wasn't one. Virtually nothing in the libraries, virtually nothing even on the web, the basic, how do you start doing security? So I went out and interviewed a lot of respected security people who are used to working with developers, people I'd come across in industry or new people or few that were connected with the university, and I did the academic thing. Who's done an academic survey? Oh well. It's grim. So what you do is you have a nice chat with each, your interviewees, you have the interview, you have the nice chat with each interview, and you record it. And you then transcribe the recording. Nowadays Teams does a pretty good job of it, but
quantitative research. It's quantitative research, right?
Yes, this is qualitative. This is qualitative research. Although you can do I've got quite good at doing quantitative as well, same techniques. So you then line by line go through coding what was said, and this is not coding in the sense of writing Java, this is coding in the sense of, with a highlighter, metaphorically, it's usually on a special app these days, you say, oh yes, that was about topic this, and that was about topic this. And at the end of it, you put all these things together and you wind together these topics and you say, oh yes, objectively now, because I've done all this, I can say that really, it wasn't what I thought, it was something else altogether. So the purpose of all this stuff is to take away all my preconceptions and the other people who are doing the interviews and get it to something that might not be right, but at least is kind of objective. And the answer to how do we do security turned out to be two things. The first was, I'm sorry, it's going to keep going on. I haven't discovered how to turn that thing off. I just realised what I've done again. Okay, so the first boiled down to two questions. The first was the simple, how do you find security and privacy problems? Because actually that's not trivial. You've got a block of codes working perfectly well. What could, there's no obvious intuitive way you immediately see the security stuff. So what it appears is that the way you do it is through challenges. It's all this lateral thinking. You've got to do lateral thinking in order to come up with these, and the way you do lateral thinking might be brainstorming, it might be an argument with somebody, it might be you have some sort of program run over the thing. I don't think it's in this list, but actually checklists are sometimes a good way of challenging yourself. I know I rely totally on checklists for packing because I can never remember everything.
And they can be automated. You've got things like check marks and app check that will do it for you.
Indeed, and you can. Some people automate tests as well. You've got, and of course you've got the feedback from the users. You've got the bug reports. You've got everything like that. So that was answered. So then you say, well, how do developers do that most often? And again, this was in the same survey. We realized the answer is a set of about anything up to 30, depending on what you're counting. But they're assurance techniques, things that people do that have got names. So the names vary a bit, and I've used different names in different papers as I've explored this, but the names, they are, broadly speaking, the most common ones are the initial one, risk assessment, or threat modeling sometimes, which is, I am thinking about what could go wrong, brainstorming as a design level thing to do. Then there's configuration review, which is a slightly odd term for it, but it's making sure that you've got all your components up to date and that none of them are, just unmanaged or not being supported and therefore going to cause you problems. There's having a tool look at your code and say, oh dear, you've got, you're adding two strings together there, that's going to cause you trouble down the way. So automated static analysis tools have got really pretty sophisticated these days. So while I certainly wouldn't recommend going through every bug, certainly running it quickly over and making sure that the biggies, the thing it's really worried about are not problems is probably a really good thing to do. You've got the old hoary pen testing, getting someone else to, getting a software expert, a security expert to try and hack it. Very expensive. Pen testers come really rather expensive, but they are the standard way of checking it. Or you can have an automated pen tester, which isn't nearly as sophisticated, but can do a lot of the stuff for a website, for very little money and very little effort. You've got the classic code review, the original developer dialectic. Tom Gill who's here, has been a great proponent of code reviews from the very beginning. These days, code reviews tend to be done around pull requests. I'm sure you will know, so whereas in the olden days it used to be you'd take a chunk of code and review it as a group. Nowadays it's probably when someone wants to put a bit of code back into the code base, that's the pull request and somebody else checks it at the time. This one is kind of a little outside the developer world, but vitally important to know what you're going to do when it does happen, because it will happen, possibly. So have a contingency plan. Again, it's not really a technique, but a very popular thing to do these days is to have a security champion. You know, someone in the team who's just a bit more interested in security. Not an expert, but just, you know, a bit more into it, possibly with support from a central, you know, Rexa training or a central group or something. And the last one, which is mentioned less but is really important, is having someone else do the work. Standardization, using security standards, using within a group, doing that. There's a few others, lots of others in fact, but these are probably the most commonly used ones. At which point, I ask you, which ones are you using? So, if you'd like to take out your phone or your you can fire it at that. You can go to Mentimeter and just answer a little quiz. We've got a few people online. It'd be very interesting to know which I've got the top 5 developer techniques in there. I'd be really interested to know which ones.
Sorry, can you put the number back up?
Yeah. I'm going to move to Chrome. Is it there?
Ah,
yeah.
That's a different number.
Is it?
Yeah. It's
Oh.
8277.
8277. That's really odd. It's the same thing, I think. Unless I have gone to the wrong Mentimeter thing in this one. Check. No, that's the right one. Okay. But nobody's got to it. So maybe my first one was wrong. I do apologise.
The presenter has changed slide. Go to slide.
Hmm?
So the presenter has just changed the slide.
Yes, I'm now. So if I go to, if you bring up 82774,
Yeah.
that should.
Is that it?
Yes, that should be it. Someone's managed to select it. That's what we've got. Haha, thank you, Simon.
Okay, interesting.
Is it just
I can only,
one?
yeah, I can only select one option out of all of those.
Oh. All right, which technique do you use most then?
Good.
Most.
Multiple select. Choose which one you select most, please. Yeah, got it working. We'll come back to it, so that's a. That's really interesting. Oh no.
So basically everything.
Well, that's a pretty good separation, actually. So you're only able to select one. So
Yes.
that is. So our favourites. I'm going to be looking mainly at threat assessment in this one, because that's where you decide which of the others, as it were, you're going to use. And I'm interested that these other ones are actually coming up rated higher. Thank you.
Yeah, I worked for a big pharma company and they used penetration testing. And they created basically giraffe tickets. So you deal with all the problems.
Yeah. It's a nice way of kind of outsourcing it. It's someone else's problem.
Because they do this on a daily basis. So they
Yeah.
So the question from the audience, why wasn't education included in the list of techniques?
On how to do threat assessment?
It's a bit like. Yeah, it's kind of even more of a meta one than all the other ones. I agree. That's a perfectly reasonable question, but it's not. It was never on anybody's list that I saw who had lists of threat assessment techniques. So hey, you know, I'm not arguing the points, but yeah. Okay, so continuing the journey, we've now got. Okay, so. It's actually pretty well known what you do for security. We've got these lists of things, you know, it's Google and Microsoft and Twitter and all these companies. They may not be perfect, but they're pretty damn good. So altogether, we don't really, there shouldn't be much of a problem. Just do security, easy. Yeah. But it doesn't always get done. So my next question was, well, all right, how do you motivate security in the developers? If it's not getting done, it must be because the developers aren't doing it. How do you motivate security in the developers? And finding an answer to that was more a matter of experimenting, seeing what worked and trying out workshops and things like that. But the answer wasn't exactly surprising in the end. It was moving from the traditional approach that used to be called a secure development life cycle, where someone comes along and says, you must do security, I tell you so, go out and do it in the way that I say, to the world in which the developers are actually in control. And security, particularly software security, is so complex that really having anyone else try to be in control or tell you what to do is madness. It's just, it doesn't work. And so, from the point of view of development being worthwhile, it is much better to have the developers as the kind of, controls that are making the choices with support from software security specialists. And I find in the last 10 years, perhaps, last 5 years actually, almost all the central security groups have gone from thinking of themselves as, lay down of the tablets of stone that are going to, and this is the way everyone's going to do it, moving to a much more, oh, you have that problem. Yeah, Fred over there's got that problem. Why don't you talk to them? Sort of an approach. And people who provide tools that you might or might not use, things like that. So they see their job now as to empower everybody else rather than to tell everybody else what to do, which is really healthy, frankly. So,
Would you call the right-hand side of that a DevSecOps approach?
Yes. Yeah, I guess so. Yes. DevSecOps suggests agile as well, and it doesn't have to be.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. You could perfectly well do a waterfall or whatever else your favourite approach is. And so, but DevSecOps is definitely firmly in this world. Yes. Yes. And the second approach we found dealt with the problem a rather different way. I don't know about you, but my attitude towards security until I started looking into it was, this is really incomprehensible and terrifying. So actually, what we found was playing a game in which one actually addresses, and I found this complete by coincidence because a friend was using the game for something else, and I played it and I thought, oh, I understand security a lot more than I thought, and we've adopted this game to a version that works with developers. It's about software rather than the other one was about sort of hardware more. And I've been using it as a thing to empower people to make it clear that actually it is possible for development technical people to make decisions about security and to make good decisions about security. So, all right, okay. So we went away and we did that, and we empowered the developers. And then a little bit of a sidetrack, but it came out of this, was the problem that we've got two worlds, the security people talking one thing and the developers talking another thing. and I've been, using different language and different ways of approaching things and so forth. And I've been working with doing research recently with a what do you call a security-based academic. So we're both academics, we both do research, but he comes from the kind of security specialist world, hacking, etc., etc. And we just don't agree on very much. We don't agree on what things are called. We don't agree on, on our approaches to things. We don't agree, there's a sort of, I always remember a room full of security specialists where it was pointed out everything they did was about something negative. It was always about what could go wrong. It was always about kind of looking at the risks and everything else. And if you have a team of developers, a group of developers, it's the other way around. It's about what can we do, it's about what can we build, it's about how can we put things positive together. And the attitudes are not the same, and the language is not the same. And we've spent a while over the last year or so actually looking at that language and saying, well, what is the difference? And because we had to, we focused on one particular domain, health IoT, and we went out and we asked people, what was the language? How were they doing security?
So
So
this
this-
is health IoT.
Health Internet of Things, so medical device, anything from medical devices to your Strava app. So we could have chosen almost anything, but that seemed a relevant one where it was going to be quite important. And from that survey, we found two things. One of our arguments was about whether people actually use storytelling. So, and I'm glad to say it turned out they did, because we found out in some earlier research that it seemed to happen quite a bit. It happens less interestingly, sort of bottom up the hierarchy, juniors talking to seniors and so on, but storytelling is a very effective way, and it's used by almost everybody in communicating, security issues and talking about them. Because otherwise it's all a bit vague, I assume, but that's what it is. So again, as we were looking towards how do we do an intervention, we thought, okay, how can we help teams with this? We thought, okay, we'd probably better have something about stories. And the other thing that's a classic story from one of the interviews. You can read it, if you can read it fast. It's just a sort of, I'm not quite sure what you deduce from it, but it's a sort of another way of looking at, it sort of gives you a complete view of something rather than okay, well, there could be a private key problem, etc. The other thing we found was that certainly in everybody we talked to, the language they used was different from the security specialists. So security specialists tend to use military language. This is my explanation of this. So you've got things like attacks, you've got threats, you've got threat modeling, you've got threat actor, which is my least favorite word, a threat actor. This is health. Can you really describe a doctor as a threat actor? It's just, no, it doesn't make sense, and they don't. The simple answer, they really don't. So in this little word cloud, the blacks are the words that are used by both, and the reds were the ones used only by the teams, only by the developers. So that had quite a lot, but not the most important ones. They did use words like attack. But what we found was, when we started drilling into, what a security person might call a threat, we found they weren't using the same words at all. So they were using words like threat being an issue or a risk or human error or whatever.
Oh, sorry, that's a question from Tom Gill.
Oh, yeah.
He's asking who has ever tried to design or engineer or architect security into the system. And of course, he's passes a URL to one of his books.
Sorry, who has designed it?
Yes, the question was, have you or anybody ever tried to design, engineer, architect security into the system?
Into a system?
Mm.
Yes, certainly. Yes, yes. So, has anyone else here done that? Yes, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I always try to.
Absolutely. Yes.
Unless you've got some measurable security objectives, you can't tell whether you've done it or not.
Maybe he's just
True.
promoting his book rather than making a real point.
Could be.
No, he's making a point.
It is a real point.
So we concluded that we wanted translations for our, in working with between the two, we want translations for cyber jargon, or we want to use sort of what a team uses, and also to use stories. And I will come back to what that meant in a moment. But returning to what was really becoming the problem finding, so we've got something that developers can actually do, but we were finding they were using these techniques, they were coming up with lots and lots of security things that they could improve, and they were never getting them done. Is this a familiar situation? Very frustrating, puts people, completely demotivates doing security stuff, because you just say, well, what's the point? If no one's prepared to give you the time and the effort to do it, what is the point? So we started looking at that. And I think the solution was best expressed by someone called Joanna Curiel, who put it in one line. This was at OWASP a few years back in London, that it's not developers who fix security issues, it's tasks, it's epics, it's time allocated to the problem by those people who allocate the time. So the question becomes, how do we motivate security in product owners? And I'm using the word product owner to mean one of the other things the survey discovered was that product owner covered a multitude of different possibilities. Sometimes it was a committee, sometimes it was, a customer, sometimes it was someone within the team, etc. But someone, I expect you do the job of product owner quite often.
I do actually.
Yes. But someone makes the call on what the development team does. So we've got the product owner. What's going on? Right. So there's a product owner. And their job is to do this prioritization against the other demands, whatever they might be, bug fixes, new functionality, etc., etc. And we have a real problem that in this sort of fight against other, functionality and so on, cyber actually is different. The whole security thing is different, because while everything else kind of comes from the stakeholders, they know they want reliability, perhaps they know they want functionality, they know they want performance. Typically, the only place that anyone will know about the lack of security is amongst the techies. So I would call them developers here, and sometimes that might be a security specialist or whatever. But it's a set of requirements coming from inside the team rather than outside. It's a bit like maintainability, which is the other horror like that. Yeah.
It's part of
You
the
know.
same, everything we call technical debt, basically.
Technical debt.
It's all got the same
Exactly.
problem.
Exactly. Security is very like technical debt. And we all know how easy, or difficult rather, it is to negotiate drawing down technical debt. Because you do a load of work and they don't see a benefit. It's not then, you know, it's just life becomes a bit easier. And security, you do a load of work and something doesn't happen.
Just tell them about EasyJet and all this.
Well, exactly. I mean, you can always do the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, etc., etc. But really, the other thing is that sort of if you tell someone in a sort of senior management role, oh yes, this horrible thing might happen, they'll simply say, oh yeah, well I've got a pile yay high of horrible things that might happen. You know, we might run out of money, we might do this, we might do that. You know, just throw cyber on with that. It doesn't actually,
Yeah.
you know, that most people are quite well defended against these sort of, you know, these threats nowadays. So that doesn't really get the job done. And as you might have gathered from the beginning, I'm not interested in getting every single one of those, you know, cyber improvements fixed. What you want is the right decisions made on this. So for the product owner then, we have two steps. How are we going to decide what security is probably required? And how are we going to sell it to our stakeholders? Because someone ultimately is not the product owner who's going to pay for it. So, looking at decide, who's familiar with risk impact calculations? Yes, yes, yes. Good. Okay. So, at the usual, there you are, there's a grid, low, medium, high, rare, and frequent, common. And you put your various things in here, and you decide where to go. And you know, so what you can do, and what we've started doing now, is you can work out for a typical organization or whatever, what your impact thresholds are. So you can put numbers in terms of money on these things. Now, I'm not pretending that would ever be a completely scientific thing that you do, but it does give you a way of just saying, well, if this happened, that's the end of Google as we know it. You know, if this happened, well, okay, it's going to, you know, it's going to be, if it's high, it's going to be really, really pretty bad, but we probably survive it once a year. You know, the medium thing, well, someone's going to get fired maybe, but not much more than that, depending on your organisation. Someone's going to hurt anyway. And the low is we could probably do a few of those a year, and you know, it wouldn't really be worth the effort of preventing it. So we can, most risk impact, very rare with very high impact. Yeah, and for most bosses faced with that, they'd say, well, I've got a lot of more likely things that would take me out completely, so I won't worry about it. And that's probably the right decision. It's different if you're dealing with something, you know, when you've got millions of users or something, and so very rare is, you know,
Rare.
is almost certain. But it's, you know, for many companies that may well be the case. And indeed, when you come to it, what about the likelihood? And we thought about this a bit, and we realized that actually, likelihoods of these things, given that they tend to be not very, they tend to be pretty rare, are something that we could provide. So that there are sort of objective, there is an objective how often this happens. But finding it out proved to be very hard. I'm still asking people for this information. I'm still not, not coming back with enormous amounts. My latest colleague said, "Oh yes, I'm a PhD student working with the London Police. So far we've been to the Prime Minister twice to get them to release the information, and they still won't." So it's...
I'll just wait until next week there'll be a new Prime Minister.
Exactly. What's the next one? But what about the likelihood? And the way we actually addressed this was we found two sources of this information. The Information Commissioner's Office is the people you have to tell if something goes wrong. So it's in law. They won't tell anybody else necessarily. They might if they fine you, but they won't necessarily tell anyone else. But they will certainly be told. So their statistics give you some idea of the number of things that have been really bad that have happened. And for the other end of the spectrum, there's a cybersecurity breaches survey, CSBS. Anyone come across that? I was actually contacted by the survey. I was in my role as chairman of the village hall. I pointed out we didn't really have many cyber problems, and maybe I wasn't the right person to interview. But yes, it's a regular survey of a pretty large number of companies every year, and they gather figures about what cyber problems have happened, what people did about them, who they told, etc. And you can get the raw data, no names, no backdrop, of course.
Is that the same as the Verizon, the annual Verizon?
No, it's not. It's not. So the Verizon one would be interesting, yes.
It's also
Yeah.
breaches.
Thank you. I'll look into that one. Yes.
Charles, do either of these, or any of these sources actually record attempted break-ins rather than actual breaches?
No, this is about actuals. Yes. Yes. So yes, I think we can reasonably assume that attempted break-ins happen all the time. The thing is, and from them we took some types of risks, what are people actually seeing happening, and some estimates of risk probabilities. Now these numbers are virtually voodoo. They're given, you're dealing with huge numbers. What I have not managed to do is to distinguish between health organisations and health organisations doing a lot with IT. That's a problem. But it gives you some idea of the relative likelihood of all of these things. So we had a few surprises. And the first one that may be perfectly obvious to everybody else, but I've never seen presented, is that when you talk about low, medium and high probabilities, and indeed impacts, you are talking usually factors of 10. So it's like decibels, it's like sound. A bit louder is 10 times is a factor of 10. Louder still is another factor of 10. So typically, and indeed, if you remember, we did those calculations about what might be low, medium, or high. Again, you'll find they're about factors of 10. So what we're talking about here when we say low, medium, and high is we're talking about huge differences in how much how effective they're likely to be. They talk about the risk exposure, which is if you remember your statistics, it's your expected loss from that per year or whatever from the problem. And a lot of people call low, medium and high 1, 2, 3. Well, that's all right, but you need to add them. So if you call it 1, 2, 3, you're working with logarithms and you add them.
Mhm.
So you add together the probability factor and the impact factor,
What do people normally do?
multiply them.
Oh, yeah.
That's the
Um,
textbook.
which, you know, I don't think it's going to affect their decisions enormously, but it's definitely not right. So you need to add. But it's when you get these risk factors, you need to remember that one grade up is just so much bigger that probably everything else is gone. You really don't care about it. It's only the top ones that you're going to be interested in. Another thing about this, which made our job easier, is the probabilities, the likelihoods that we get. Well, we only need to give them to the nearest factor of 10. That's all we're interested in, really. I mean, obviously we can't, any number we give would be completely meaningless because it would be different in your product. Do you see what I mean? It's going to have other factors on it. But all we need to do when we cite them is say, well, is it going to be in that band or that band? And we're talking about the nearest factor of 10. So all of a sudden we can have a tiny bit more confidence in the numbers we're citing because they are so different from each other. The other big surprise is that cyber, meaning bad people using technological kind of cybery things, like password cracking or whatever, doesn't happen. Really doesn't happen very much, actually. The real problems are things like fraud, they are things like people sending in the health space, it's perfectly overworked doctors emailing to the wrong person. It's, you know, these non-cyber risks are 10 times as much as the cyber ones.
There's a lot of social engineering going on at the moment.
Indeed. Which doesn't quite come under cyber, it's fraud, but that's the sort of thing that's happening. Yeah.
So not patching, is that a cyber?
Patching is cyber. You know, this isn't an excuse to go out and leave your, you know, I mean, we all know if you leave your website uncybered, there'll be some of the, what do they call them, toe rag hacker come along any moment and just do something nasty with it. You know, this isn't a license to just sort of, you know, not bother, but it is a reason not to panic over the cyber stuff. Is that, and it's also a reason when we're talking security and privacy to start thinking, if the most dangerous thing I've got is somebody emailing the thing to the wrong person, maybe the most important mitigation I have to do is to make sure that's quite difficult. You know, so maybe a button they can click saying email it to the right person and it creates the email is actually going to be a lot more valuable than, you know, the next level of defense against some attacker in Korea.
Typical.
So, okay, so in our sort of board now looks kind of more like that, you know, 1, 10, 100, 110, and what we've started doing, and this is the fun bit, and I will make it available, is we've started making, this is a sort of combination of a checklist and a whatever, we've started making threat cards. So this is a story, remember I promised you a story? So it's a story about what's going on, what the attack is, who does it. Picture, of course, because people like pictures. Well, software people generally aren't so fussed, but people do like pictures. And an idea, again from these statistics, how likely it is. So because I don't have a colour scheme for how likely something is, let alone a colourblind compatible one, here I've used dots. If anyone has a better idea, that's fine. I'm delighted to use it. So each one's got a name, a description, the actor, and of course, the frequency. So
Are those microdots containing tracking pixels?
they are, of course, yes.
But not really a quantified impact.
Sorry?
Not really a quantified impact.
No, and that's it. So that was the bit that we can't do for any given app because we don't know. So we can reckon how likely targeted ransomware might be because we know we have those figures. We don't know whether you're going to care or not. You know, how much have you got to lose? Is it, you know, if you haven't got a server, you've only got a few machines, it's all well backed up, are you really going to care? Could happen. Are you really very likely? You're not very likely, we know it's rare. Is this something, you know, is this something that would wipe you out, or would you just go out and get some more machines and start again from scratch? You know, some things it would be one, some things it would be another, some things you'd say, oh, well, yeah, it's probably worth making sure we have a few offline backups from 25 years ago, whatever it might be, so we can get it back, whatever, you know, it's worth thinking about these things. So, I'm going to ask you now to have a look at that one. Imagine you are producing this. Who's familiar with the Strava app? I hope this is. No? The Strava app collects, it's used by sportsmen and it tracks, it runs on your phone and it tracks what you're doing and tells you, you know, how your heart, your fitness and so on. So it's full of, it's ridiculous amounts of personal information, but, you know, but it's all really a bit of fun and free. So if you were in just sort of a quick discussion, got 5 minutes or so, just think about if you were faced with that, what might you expect the impact to be?
For the company.
For your, yes, for you and your company.
It's 877, sorry, 8277 4867 2.
8 to 2, so, there's an 8 missing.
Prefix and 8, yeah.
Yeah, prefix and 8 on the menti.com. Yes.
At the moment, the new slide hasn't come up.
Oh, it will in a moment. I have to do Command Tab. And that's 8277 4867.
Nice.
There you are. So what's the impact of that?
And you're asking us about the system that we're currently working with, or specifically about Strava?
I think specifically about Strava, or we're talking about different systems. Although, if you prefer, then
Strava app is tied to a person, right?
yes, yes.
So that would be different from.
When I first started using them, you could share the exact location where you live from.
Yes, they've stopped it now.
It's like, Jesus Christ.
Yes.
How do you, and it was by default, right?
Yeah.
So like potentially someone could find where you run, you know, where you live, where you come back, everything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, you know, Facebook, by default, it doesn't protect you. You know, everything is
And they
public.
did actually change that about 2 months ago.
Did they?
Yeah, yeah. You're
There's
quite
a
right.
feature where even if you start the run right outside your house, it doesn't publicly share the first
Yeah.
several minutes or several hundred meters. So whenever someone sees your run on the app,
Yeah.
they will see that you're starting from some other location other than
Yeah.
when you
No,
actually
no,
start.
no, but it was like 2 or 3 years ago when I first started.
Oh,
You
yeah.
could actually start the exact location, like.
Yeah, and they had a lot of problems with soldiers in
It's a very
country
different kind of
areas
problem.
that, you know, it was all a bit obvious where they were. Okay, so, but this one was a different problem, which is the kind of, you know, what would happen if someone effectively took out the whole system. Yeah, and had managed to scramble all the backups, etc., etc. I think it might be hard to do for Strava, but if they achieved it, yeah, it's somewhere, I reckon it's somewhere between high and critical. Because if you're going to be, if that was offline for a week, you know, while they scramble around trying to sort it out, that would.
Oh,
Would that be
It's usually
bad?
cheap just to pay the ransom.
Well, the
Yeah, they
reputational
might
damage
do.
would
Yes,
be,
true. Yes.
the reputational damage would be catastrophic for them
Yeah.
because people would think, okay, well, they clearly got hacked.
Yeah.
They can't secure their systems, so I'm gonna start using Nike Plus or whatever,
Yeah.
which probably has better security.
Or I'm
That's
not
what-
going to use any other
Well, yeah,
thing like that
Just
forever.
the Zoom has better security, yes. Okay, thank you. So, timings. We've had.
We have for about half an hour.
Great. So, here's another one. So, you know, and this is much, as you see, is much more common. So this is, again, supposing you've, in the case of, you know, what might this be in the case of Strava? Be someone in the back office, isn't it?
I'm really sorry to come with this, but someone has, so my wife applied to get her visa here, and they have sent the data of someone else to my wife.
Happens all the time.
It does.
Exactly the same
Yeah,
thing.
Yeah. I'll bet you anything they didn't report it to the Information
Of
Commissioner's
course,
office.
why would you?
Yes, yes. Well, they might have to. Some, I mean, they won't because they're diplomatic, but, yeah. Yes. So that's a fairly common one. What would you say, what would be the equivalent in, for that in Strava? This is someone emailing stuff to the wrong person.
And it happens so frequently according to all the dots.
Yeah, that's. And I may say in our survey, several people told me that was what kept them awake at night. What's that? Yeah.
It also depends whose data.
Yes, and how much of it? Let's see that, yes. It's one of the classic early, one of the classic early breaks was somebody just left a computer on a train and. Yeah.
another interesting point here is the way a lot of email servers treat the email address is that they basically ignore any dots in the first part of it. While a lot of the systems where a user can register, they consider that as a separate character. So an email address that has your name dot surname at something.com is the same as name surname at something.com.
I didn't know
according
Yeah,
to
that's-
Gmail doesn't it?
Yeah,
In
Gmail
Gmail,
does that.
yeah.
Yeah.
You can put any number of dots
if
into it.
your
Yeah.
app or if your website doesn't account for that, you can
Yeah.
register separate accounts.
That's what I do with Amazon, to be honest.
Yeah, and I've been getting someone's insurance information from Canada for years because of that.
Really?
Yeah,
Cool. Okay. All right, we've thought about it a bit. Yeah, medium, it's probably going to be embarrassing, but it's hardly going to wipe us out. Yes. Okay, so based on that, we can now, product owner we've now got ways of deciding what are going to be the important things to do. But that's only half the job, because someone has to sell it as something that is worth doing. And this is, I hate sales, I'm first to admit. We all have to do it all the time, but hey, it's one of the hardest things. But this is really almost about marketing. It's about how you're thinking about what you're doing and how we're communicating. And the way I represent this is a lovely thing I found recently about how product owners work. And I've no idea if this describes what you do, sir, but we talk about they see whether things are desirable, whether they're feasible, whether they're profitable. So
there are other factors as well, but
yeah, whether your boss has insisted on it and
whether it fits into the corporate framework
yes,
is also
that's what I said.
consideration.
Yeah, yeah.
I was just thinking that most of the product owners I've worked for had no thought about whether things were feasible or not.
True. Yes. So the approach we've been exploring that seems to it seems to lead to some really quite interesting and successful outcomes is what I term security jiu-jitsu, using your enemy's power against them. So you can, supposing you've got something, the classic one, oh dear, we need to update lots of components because they're all a bit out of date and it's terribly painful updating components. Well, is it desirable? Nah, don't care. Feasible? Yes. Is it profitable? Nah, not really. But supposing we can think of a way of flipping it. Supposing we turn it round and we say, this is just one way of doing it, and it's an interesting thing. We could say, we offer up-to-date industry standard security. Yeah, saying exactly the same thing, yeah, we've kept the components up to date, etc., etc. But it's putting it in a way that kind of makes it sound good.
Something that you can sell.
So it's something you can sell, absolutely. And that features on the desirability, feasibility and profitability. Or you might say, here was a classic one. I had a very competent team, but they had a problem that some of their customers' products needed a lot more security than others. And they were jibing at paying more for it. So you would have something that collected all the health details of their customers, being the same as the baker down the road who just has a nice flat website that tells you what he's selling. So having that was neither desirable nor profitable. But if you phrase it again, and this was a lovely thing suggested by one of the product marketing people. What about, she said, we offer gold, silver or bronze security. All of a sudden you turn the discussion round. If you're collecting lots of personal data and the customer says, yeah, well, we're all right with bronze, you're perfectly legitimate to say, well, are you going to say that to your manager? Are you going to say that to your customers? I wouldn't. So all of a sudden it's become clear what they are paying for with the extra money. And that is both desirable and feasible and turned out pretty profitable as well. I believe in the end they actually had 5 different dimensions of this. So there was gold, silver, bronze, and then there were a couple of specials for particular things, but I never got the details of that. It was,
Yeah, I might think, well, actually, even if I'm the baker, I still want to have security that's gold.
no, this is about how much you pay for.
Yeah, but if you
I
implement,
understand where you're coming
Yes,
from,
yes.
but from a perception point of view, well, I'm a baker, but I still want to have 100% gold. I want to have good security. That's appropriate for me. It'll
Yes,
still be
but
appropriate.
that's right, and that's why I say, yeah, but bronze is fine for you. It's like somebody coming. It's. I mean, I always do my
That's in terms of your offerings as opposed to my perception of that offering.
exactly. I mean, I always try to get security things in terms of physical security, and indeed the word itself is a lovely one of these words that if you think about it, someone's taken what's actually a negative thing and made it positive. Security, is actually taking you might be attacked and making it into a positive thing. You're not going to be attacked now. We'll call it security. So yeah, so it's like saying, well, do you want, one of these bantam super duper door locks with extra bars and bars on all the windows and something like this? Well, you might do. Or you might say, no, that's ridiculous. And the decision is going to depend on where you live, how paranoid you're feeling, whether you've been attacked or whatever, etc., etc. But that's your decision, and it's a matter of how much you're prepared to pay. And this is a way of putting the discussion of how much it's sensible to pay into something that's easy to discuss. Sensible? And what we found is that actually challenge a team with, think of the major threats that you just decided on, major probable things that might go wrong, what are the risks? And you think about, well, what would it be like? What would we call it if we solved them? And we found almost any group of developers, I thought I'd have to do lots of teaching, but almost any group of developers could come up with answers to that. How well they worked? Some of them worked really well. Others possibly less. I don't know. There was a team I worked with in a government department for whom, shall I say, there was absolutely no question of not doing any, every security thing had to be done. But they went away and they thought about it a bit, and they realized, actually, they had customers who might can the project if they didn't see enough progress. And so they didn't need to do all the security things up front. They could sequence them. And so by thinking of what's the positive outcome for the customer, they realized they could actually have a much better outcome, even within the context of you must always do all security. I was very impressed, actually, with that one. So we've now got these as workshops. We do them online or we do them face-to-face. I haven't tried doing both at the same time. I suppose it might be possible like this. And this is all part of the Hipster project, for which I have to thank a group called Petrus, based at UCL. Job is to do IoT stuff. So, questions and comments?
so I think that what you said earlier, that developers are, security needs to start with the developer, and that's, 100% correct. Mm-hmm. But to actually motivate developers to do security from the beginning, mm-hmm. It means to have happy developers that care about your product and about what you're doing, because mostly a developer and any kind of Homo sapiens, they are interested in actually solving a problem and creating something, because that's something tangible that, well, guess what, it gives you a dopamine release. Whereas testing the software and delivering quality software, or delivering software that's secure, it's not on the first place. The first place is delivering the feature, and that's what we're working in agile in sprints, and if I tell to my at the end of the sprint to my product owner or to my boss, like, oh, I'm still waiting to finish the security, it's like, forget about that, just give me the feature, because that's what they want, that's what they care about. So next sprint, like, screw security, I'm just going to deliver what they want, and that's it.
So that is why it is really important that what the product owner wants is to be able to deliver this. Because if they've leapt up and down and said, yes, we do need this, then in that case you have your professional pride in getting it right,
Yes.
but you also have that argument when they say, oh, this is being a bit slow.
Yes.
You have that thing. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I think there was a
That's what he said.
very relevant comment on the screen just now from someone that security is not a software problem, it's a system aspect of what you're trying to build.
Mhm.
So it's
Yeah.
not something that you build separately
Could bring
from
it,
the
yeah.
features. It should be part of your overall design for your system, for your software. Otherwise, it becomes much more complex and much more expensive to do. Securing something that already exists is always much more difficult and
I know
more expensive.
it's the same with bugs.
Mhm.
Like you should,
Yeah.
like a bug that if you catch it in the development stage, well, the impact is low compared to if you release it out in the wild and 100 guys exploit it. So
Yes, but never forget as well that sometimes getting it out in the wild is very important. Look at the story of Zoom that we're talking through here, who managed to sell their product for many years on the basis that it was more secure than the competition. And when they really, really, really were successful, they were able to buy up the companies that made it so that they could actually make it more secure than the competition.
always about bluffing, right?
Yeah.
Would you consider incident response part of this topic of security?
Yes, it clearly is. It's usually outside the scope of the development team, though, so I haven't been concentrating on it.
So, coming back to the previous comment about software versus systems, it is definitely a part of the system design because you're
Yes.
designing something where you will have some operational procedures for the users, the operators, the engineers. And incident response would definitely be part of that. That basically makes the admission that something will definitely go wrong for someone at some point.
Mhm.
So you have to have some procedures in place to
Which
address
was
that.
what I call contingency plan. Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So that's one way of not doing security.
Yeah.
If you know that something's going to go wrong, then as long as you have a proper recovery process for that, you're probably okay
Yeah,
in most cases.
exactly.
Or you can try to fix it before it's too late, because that's what you do in martial arts. If you're defending yourself and someone crosses the line, it means you can proceed. So if something on that policy, on that cookbook, it's really, as you say, it's going to kill you, then you should fix it before it happens. I guess there's no point in trying to fix it, after you're in the hospital, let's say.
Yes, but let's always remember that we could get run over crossing the road any time.
Yes,
That doesn't stop us going out for a walk.
yes, that's right.
Or in my case, cycling home this evening. We take certain risks and we just accept them. Yes, it could be completely fatal cycling home. It could be completely fatal
No,
crossing the road to the
I was
station.
speaking more like if you know that a certain neighborhood is not advisable to walk at night,
So you minimise your risks.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Because you know something for a fact that
Demonstrations.
it's just avoid it. I'm not saying something that, you know, is crossing the street.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yes. So you do whatever mitigations you can, but ultimately there is always a residual risk.
Yes.
You can't get rid of it altogether. And you have your contingency plan. Yes. You have the address of the nearest hospital or your 999 on your phone. You know, you have your mitigations. You know, you're going to look both ways before you cross the road, etc. But ultimately, if you want to do anything,
you need to take some risks.
You need to take risks.
There's a factor in, you sort of mentioned it a bit anyway, but this just factors into the fact that also people are just very, very bad at making decisions about things that are unlikely.
Yes, yes. And what is it? The classic is people we are built to overstate the unlikeliness, either to underestimate or overestimate the odds of unlikely things. Because otherwise we never go out and try and kill the mammoth, which provides us food for however long it is. At least that was the explanation I saw. You know, so we tend to think unlikely things are more likely
Yeah.
than they are.
Exactly, that's a point. Because like sometimes even in personal life, you think, oh, what if this happens? So you have for 90% of the cases, everything is fine, but you worry about 10%.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, exactly. Human nature. Yes.
Right, I think we're coming to the end. Thanks everyone for attending today. So I should have said at the beginning of the meeting, but I was too busy trying to sort out the technical issues. Many thanks to Charles for offering to do this session and for a really informative evening today.